Good evening and welcome to Face to Face, the show where we talk with local broadcasters here in South Dakota. Usually on the show, we talk with someone who's on air on the radio or on camera for television. But today on my show, we're talking with someone who used to be on air as a reporter and is now the 10 o'clock producer for KELO-TV. Today my guest is Beth Fuller. How are you today, Beth?
I'm doing well, Avi.
Beth, when did you start producing for television?
I was hired at KELO in 1996 as the 5 o'clock, 10 o'clock producer. I had been at KDLT before that. And KELO didn't have a reporter opening, but they had this producer opening, and I thought, well, it'd be fun to try that. And I did it, but I wasn't ready to give up reporting yet. I still really missed going out on a daily basis, and I felt really trapped. But then after I've been reporting at KELO for about 4 years, I don't know, I just had been thinking about maybe making the move to producing. I'd been filling in for a lot of people last year, and I really found that I enjoyed it a lot. And so then when the kind of people shuffled jobs in January, I asked to be put into that mix, and I ended up being the 10 o'clock producer.
How long have you had, shall I say, a fever for broadcasting? How long have you really liked it?
I think, like a lot of people who are in the business, I've wanted to do it for a long time. You know, I think it's something that you kind of get the idea when you're young. In grade school, I knew I wanted to do this, and you did the career assessments in junior high and stuff, and I was always kind of in this area, like maybe advertising, and I thought about law school and that kind of thing. But I really, mostly, verbal kinds of writing and talking and things like that. And, then by the time I got to high school, I realized nothing else had appealed to me quite like this had. My parents were both journalists, so that I think played a huge part in it also.
Where did they work at?
Well, they met when they were each in college. My dad at University of Missouri, my mom in Nebraska, and they were both editors of their college newspapers. And my dad graduated and got a job at a newspaper in Mason City. My mom graduated a year later and got hired in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Star. And when they got engaged, they were trying to find a place they could work together as both be journalists. My dad got the job up in Minneapolis with my mom, and they worked there for about 12 years. And then my dad moved us to Kentucky, where he was the editor of a newspaper, and then came to Sioux Falls, where he worked at the Argus Leader for a long time, from when I was in kindergarten till 6th grade. And then we moved out to Washington, D.C., where he worked on USA Today for a couple of years. Then we came back, and he was at the Argus all through high school and college.
Wow.
So we have really strong journalists. My family, we always have at least one newspaper. We're always watching TV news. We used to have to bring a newspaper article to dinner, and discuss it to keep us involved in current events. So it's something that my parents, it was around the house a lot. We always were talking about news and that kind of thing, so I think that introduced me to it early.
What classes did you take in college to get ready for broadcasting?
I took a lot of course, writing classes. That was the big focus. I went to Boston University, and they have a good.
That's a big school for broadcasting.
It
a lot
is.
of people.
It's a really good school. They have a strong journalism focus, but then they also are good in other areas. So just in case I got to college and thought, oh no, I've made a horrible mistake, I thought, well, I could switch my major and I'd be all right. But I took a lot of writing classes, which helped me a lot, I think. And then I did a political science minor, so I also took a lot of government and politics and history and that kind of thing. Because I think the more you understand about what you're covering, the better journalist you are. Whether you're producing or reporting or anchoring or whatever, if you understand how things work, then it's much stronger that way.
Why do a lot of college juniors and seniors take an internship between years of college before they go to their first job?
That's one of the most important things you can do. The newsroom is such a unique environment, and it's really fast-paced, and it can be stressful, and it's different every day. How do you know if your personality clicks with that unless you can have the opportunity to work there for a summer? Then okay, I like the schedules, I like the daily deadlines, I like, your work is really held up to scrutiny because people see it, and if they don't like what they see, they'll call and let you know. I mean, it's a job where you're accountable to a lot of people with a lot of personalities every day. I happened to intern, actually, I did 5 internships when I was in college. I started the summer after my freshman year. I interned at KDLT. Summer after my freshman year, summer after my sophomore year, I interned on Capitol Hill for a summer because I wanted to see how politics worked. I interned for CNN in London, and I interned for the ABC station in Boston.
Wow.
So I got a nice cross-section. You get the sample of the station, where likely, you would work KDLT, which I was very fortunate. They hired me right out of college. But then you also got to see the bigger market, and you got to see how CNN worked. I mean, I think you can't do enough internships if you're interested in this kind of job.
What were the differences like, from going from a small market to London?
Huge. I mean, as you can imagine. KDLT was great because you got to do so much, I mean, I got to do all kinds of different stories, and the newsroom was incredibly supportive. People really gave you feedback, and you got to do a lot as an intern, which was great. I know KELO has an excellent internship program also. CNN, I was more like, can you call and see if this guest is available in 2 weeks? I mean, you didn't get to do very much at all. I ran the teleprompter, but it was a lot of observing. They wouldn't let me do, KDLT, you're a notch below a reporter. CNN, you're way down, but it still is a great experience because you get a sense of how that works. And like with CNN, it was over in London, so I was with their World Business Today was the show, so it was business news, and you got a sense with how they worked with the newsroom and how they incorporated with their affiliates back in the United States. It was a really interesting experience.
And the Washington one, what?
Oh, I interned they don't have them anymore. It was a congressional coalition called Northeast Midwest Congressional Coalition. It's where states from the Northeast and states from the Midwest, their congressmen would work together on bills. So like, say there's something involving the Great Lakes that people in Michigan really cared about. People in Pennsylvania might not care that much, but if they could help the Michigan people out with the Great Lakes, then the Michigan people might be more willing to help the Pennsylvania people when it comes to mining or something like that. So it was really interesting because you got a sense of a lot of different issues, and you got a sense of how Congress worked, which is extremely valuable. I just found that fascinating too.
Do you like the local or the national better? Which one?
Well, I thought, you have ideas of what you think you're going to like when you get into it. And at one point, my goal was to be some kind of, like national correspondent or even international and travel around the world and be like, in all the hot spots when the news is breaking. Now, like, that idea does not appeal to me at all. Your priorities change a little bit. Now, I really like local news. I think, it's so interesting to know what's going on in your community. Like, I love knowing Sioux Falls really well. And it's a great place to live, great quality of life, all the things you hear. The economy is good, low crime rate. People are so friendly. Kids can walk to school. And when you're like in high school and college, that stuff isn't as important, but when you get married and start thinking about life, then that sort of is more appealing, and you don't want to be gone all the time. So I'm extremely happy being in Sioux Falls.
When did you arrive at KELO?
96, in the fall of 96, so I've almost been there 5 years.
And what, did you have a particular beat that you, or
Never
particular
at
stories that you
KELO.
did?
At KDLT, I was first education and then cops and courts. But at KELO, I was more general assignment reporter. And I always did a little bit of producing. I produced our Saturday morning show for several years, which I really enjoyed, except the hours. But I enjoyed producing the show a lot. But, it's kind of fun to be a general assignment reporter because you just learn a lot about a lot of different things. There's a lot to be said for good beat reporting, but it's kind of nice when you can jump around too.
What were some of the stories that you truly remember doing at your internships and at KELO?
Oh, I like court stories. I always think those are so interesting to see how the justice system plays out. So I've done a couple of trials that I've really liked, but the stories that are the most interesting are the stories that involve people, like the Spencer tornado. I will always remember that. People are just so amazing because they're at their absolute worst. You come into their town and their house is gone and they have nothing, and to talk to people at that moment in their lives, it's just you try to think of what you can do. Like, for example, KELO had a telethon, and we raised all this money to help people of Spencer rebuild, and it's a great thing to be able to use our position to help people, and I think that's one of the best things about KELO. I really like how we do that.
Your job now is the 10 o'clock producer.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, not too many people exactly know what a producer does.
This is true.
What does your job title as producer mean? What job do you have there?
Well, it probably means different things at different stations. At KELO, it means that you kind of think you live news all day. It's really weird. You wake up, you read the paper, you watch, like I'll watch the Today Show, or I'll watch, CBS This Morning, I watch local news cut-ins, and I try to get a sense of what my story ideas are for the day. About 10 o'clock, I'll call into my assignment editor and give him my story ideas, things that I've seen that I think we could do, and he'll tell me how the day is shaping up. Like, I think we're going to send, like, for example, we're going to send a crew to Huron where it's flooding. We're going to send someone to Marshall, Minnesota. Somebody's shooting an ice shoot in Worthington. And you get a sense of how the day is going. Then I come in at 1 o'clock, and the 6 o'clock and the 5 o'clock producer, myself and the assignment editor, the four of us sit down and kind of go through the stories, where we are, and divide them up into shows. And then you fight for the best stories for your show, and try to figure out how they all fit into the big scheme of things. And then most of the afternoon, I'm kind of shuffling order, and I'm helping reporters, make calls, or if you run into a roadblock here, let's try it this way. And but then probably around 4, then I really buckle down and start writing,
Really?
and looking for things off of the feeds. We check the Associated Press wires for South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa, because we cover all 3 states. Because of our unique position geographically, we have a lot of Iowa viewers, a lot of Minnesota viewers, so we definitely, make sure we include them in what we're covering. I also look at the CBS feeds, the CNN, Fox. We have a lot of resources to find out kind of what's going on, to get a video of stories. And then 10 o'clock is great because you can do a great mixture of local and national. The challenge is to make it fresh so that people who have seen 5 and 6 still feel like they have to watch 10 or they're going to miss something, which I think, we do a good job of it. Especially in the past year or so, we've really made that a priority to make it feel different and give viewers something new, so that you can't just watch one newscast, you really need to watch more than one.
Are there any particular types of stories that you're looking for, that you're targeted for at 10 o'clock?
I think 10 o'clock you have to make sure that people, if it's their only newscast of the day, they're going to get a full picture of what happened, both local and national. 5 o'clock relies a little bit more on national, 6 o'clock almost entirely local. 10 o'clock is the mixture. I think every newscast at KELO you like to think of as the newscast of record. If you were to just pull that one show from that day, you would know all the big stories. But I think 10 o'clock is especially in a position, because we're at the end of the day, a lot happens between 6 and 10. A lot of times we have breaking news. A lot of times a story that we started on early in the day, it'll come to conclusion, and we'll find out new information. So that's a great opportunity for 10.
What happens when breaking news occurs between 6 and 10? What does the producer... actually, first of all, who do you have working between 6 and 10? Who was down at the station?
Well, it's me and the anchors, Don Jorgensen and Angela Kennecke, and then a production assistant, a part-time person who's can either be a high school student or college student, who is really helpful as far as finding video, and maybe sometimes they'll see something on the wire that they'd like included in the show, and we can talk about that. And it's pretty sparse in the newsroom, and then sports, of course, is there too, and weather.
So you don't really have a big staff. So
no.
What happens when breaking news occurs in that time?
It's up to me not to mess it up. It's you listen to the police scanner and the fire scanner, and we have a night beat crew also, a photographer and a reporter who, 99% of the time have started working on their story, making phone calls late afternoon. So by 6 or 7, they should know what they're doing, and they're likely out shooting it. So it's a judgment call on whether you're going to pull them off the story they're already working on, or if you're going to have to call in somebody else who's at home, which quite often happens if there's a big story. How you're going to cover it, if you need to send a live truck, if we're going to break in before the 10 o'clock to let people know what's happening, like we had to when that plane crashed out by the Ramkota. We broke in that night. The night the phones went out across the state, again, that was a really unique situation.
Do you have to clear it with someone first, or you're the ultimate decision maker to break in? Wow. What's going through your mind?
I think people, it's a lot easier to explain why you did break in than why you didn't. So if it's something interesting, and if it's something that affects a lot of people, and if people at home it would help them to know this information before 10 o'clock. I think it's the more information you can give the viewers, the better. And the sooner you can do it. Breaking news and breaking weather are priorities. And oftentimes if there's a storm coming, of course we're not going to wait till 10 o'clock to tell people what's happening. Jay will break in with a forecaster. We'll be crawling stuff up on the bottom of the screen. And if there's breaking news, like cell phones, that was a Friday night, just probably a month ago, February maybe. Yeah, I think it was in February, and cell phones were out, faxes were out, pagers were out, internet, long distance, hardline phones, everything's out. So what do they have? They have TV and radio, I mean, so we were able to go down to the 911 center and do live reports with the 911 director saying, if you have an emergency, here's what you should do, which I think is a valuable service to give people, because it's a real important responsibility that you take, educating people and letting them know what you know and get the information out so that people have the information to make good decisions.
Are there any types of stories that you really won't air at 10 versus 5 and 6? Are there any particular stories that you just don't think are for your audience?
I don't think so. If something has been going on all day, that's the challenge. If we have a lot of news, we go, KELO has a show from 5:30 to 7, 9 to 9:30, 12 to 12:30, 5 to 5:30, 6 to 6:30, 10 to 10:30. So if there's a story that started in the morning show, it's a real challenge to find a new way, some new information, a new reason to present it at 10, so that people don't feel like, oh yeah, I saw that. I mean, you really have to think, is there new information here I can give people? Maybe I should really shorten it up. Maybe it's affecting someone that we haven't thought of. That's the challenge for 10 o'clock, when there's something that's been going on all day.
What's something that's helped you in the past being a reporter, now as a producer?
I think what helps, because I know a lot of who to call for things, because I've had to go through those stories, so that helps me help night beat reporters, or I have a sense of who we have in the community who might know about that. That's very valuable. Understanding the constraints that reporters and photographers are under, because I was just out there, and I know there's some things that are unreasonable, that you can understand kind of where they're coming from, because that's where I just was. And I think news judgment is always good. Sometimes you send somebody to a story and you think this is going to be the best story, and they get there and they call and they say, listen, this isn't what we thought it was, this is not, there aren't any people here, this isn't interesting. And then being the producer who was a reporter, you go, oh yeah, I know that happens, where I think if you are off the streets too long, you can kind of forget that.
Being here in South Dakota, sometimes the lead story of the night will be weather.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, do you like it when weather is the predominant story of the evening?
Oh, sure.
Or
yeah.
Really?
Well, because we have so much weather in South Dakota. We have blizzards and storms and, spring flooding and thunderstorms, and that very often is the first, it sets off news, Mm-hmm. Weather just doesn't operate in a vacuum. Weather causes things that flood homes and, can hurt people, and so I think that's just as important as news. I don't have a problem with that at all. And I think sometimes it takes, Friday night, we gave a lot of extra time to weather on Friday night because this storm system is creeping across the state, and you have to let people in the region know what's going on. So I think breaking news, breaking weather, that's what people want, and that's what we're going to give them.
These are just general opinion questions.
Oh, here we go.
What's something that you really do not like being a producer? What's one of the biggest hassles you have?
I don't know. I know there are. I mean, it's not a perfect job. I suppose being limited by resources, especially at 10 o'clock, maybe you'd like to have more people there so that you could do more things. I don't know. Staffing, I suppose, is the biggest thing, but, at KELO, we're lucky because we have a nice big newsroom where I always have a night beat reporter, and I always have my anchors who can also do that.
Who did you look up to in your early years as role models?
Probably my parents. I mean, I think, I always, watch different journalists on TV, of course, like Barbara Walters and things like that. But I think, when you meet people who aren't even necessarily in journalism, and you can take little parts of what they've done or where they are and say, yeah, I think that might be able to work for me. So I think just a lot of my friends' parents and, the adults in my life when I was growing up, I think were good influences on me.
What's your opinion on kind of who has an easier job in the business, men or women? Do you think, both in getting into the job and staying in the television business?
I think it's one of those fields where things are equal, which is fortunate. I don't know that it's always been that way. I think now it is. I certainly feel completely equal with my male peers in the newsroom. But if you do look at management across the country and at KELO, it's very male dominated. Almost everywhere, but that's because, you know, the generation before me and the people just a few years older than me weren't as lucky. Now I have great opportunities, and I think you'll start seeing more women take those positions as my generation and the generation before me. I mean, it's a gray line, like with my parents' generation. I think they were some of the first to start breaking those boundaries, and it just gets easier and easier for women as time goes on, which is great.
Do you have an embarrassing moment on camera?
Well, I was in the newsroom before I came over here. I'm like, oh, what if he asked what my most embarrassing moment was? I can never think of one, but of course your coworkers can. So Christy Peel said, tell them about the time you fell on the ice.
Oh my.
Oh, it was terrible. It was one of those overnight ice storms, like in the fall. So it's, you know, it starts as rain and then it gets real slick. It was in the morning. Must have been like in '97, I think. And I was just driving to work, and it was so terrible. And that's when I worked at KDLT, and the roads were all slick, and I mean, everybody was just creeping along. And I saw a KDLT photographer along the side of the road, so I pulled over, and I thought, well, I'll just, you know, we'll do our story. So we interviewed the people, and we're running around. You know, we're so careful on the ice. And so finally, I got to the point where I can't believe this, where I was going to do my stand-up.
Oh.
And so I'm like, you know, shuffling to show you how slippery it is. Like, you've got to be careful. Boom. I fell back, and it was so fast, I couldn't even catch myself. I mean, I just went back, and my head hit the sidewalk, and it was really bad. I was really hurt. I had to go.
Did you have to go to the hospital?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, geez.
And I had turned out I had a crack in my skull.
Oh.
I know. And of course, it was caught on video, so that's the embarrassing part. It's not like you just fall. So then I got hired at KELO, and my good friend Brad Dumke, who was the photographer, still worked at KDLT. So he just went ahead and sent that tape over. So it was at my first Christmas party at KELO, you know, and they're all like, boom, boom, watching me fall. And now he works at KELO too, and I like to remind him often of how he, I mean, and you watch it, and it's hysterical, because I just fall so fast. But but then I had to get a CAT scan. Then I had to take medication because I thought I had a crack in my skull, so I wouldn't get like meningitis. And I went back. The worst part is, like, I went back to work and finished the story.
Oh.
Like, you know, I got this horrible headache, and I'm really not doing so well. But it was the lead story of the day, and so I couldn't just go home. I knew I'd be letting them down, so I went to work and did the story, and then went back to the hospital. Isn't that pathetic? That's so terrible.
Well, what happens when journalists put themselves, you know, really close to that line for a story? You know, and as a producer, you know, are you really almost like a dead mother to them?
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't want anybody to get hurt. No story is worth getting hurt for. But a lot of times, you know, like you're out in severe weather, or you're, you know, I think weather is probably the most dangerous situation. I think in bigger markets, you're in situations that could become violent, you know, but that doesn't happen very often around here. With, you know, you hear people tell stories about like gunfire whizzing by them and things. We don't have that around here, fortunately. But yeah, I mean, Friday night we had the health fair at the Empire Mall, and we were going to do a 5 o'clock live shot, and there's lightning. You can't put up the mast of the live truck when there's lightning. Somebody could get electrocuted. So as a producer, and you know, it's the producer who makes the call, and of course there's only one call to make. No, absolutely not. We'll skip the live shot. Nobody's going to get hurt. You know, you really do have to make sure, because it can be really exciting, even getting to a story. You know, our photographers are very good and go the speed limit, but it's tempting. You know, you want to get going. You want to get there first. You want to be fast, but you really, you know, have to be careful, and you know, nothing's worth getting hurt over. No story is worth getting hurt over.
Why did you do news and not weather and sports?
Well, because I know nothing about sports. It'd be a disaster if I did sports. And weather, like, I like the news part of weather, you know, like when it affects people and when it's interesting, but, you know, there's a lot of days like today where it's gorgeous and sunny and life is good, you know, and that wasn't as interesting to me. I did do weather a couple of times. I filled in, and it's fun. I like it, but it's not really why I got into the business. Like, for me, I just like to know what's going on, and I like the writing, and I like the, you know, stories and the meat of what's going on. And whether you're kind of isolated, you have your own set of what's going on, but it's not the news. It's, you know, cold fronts moving in and high and low pressure and that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to watch, but I don't want to do it all day.
What's something surprising people would, once they heard it, they would be very surprised to hear about the 10 o'clock show?
I don't know. I don't think people understand maybe, I don't know, what producers do. I think, you know, kind of what you were talking about. Like, people, when I see friends and stuff, they say, I don't see you anymore. What are you doing? And you say, well, I'm producing. What's that? I don't think people understand exactly how much work goes on behind the scenes. And, you know, also the production department is incredibly important at KELO. We have a fantastic production department. And so you've got not only the anchors, weather, and Don and Angela in sports, you also have like a director and an audio person and a graphics person and a producer and a production assistant and camera operators and videotape operators and technical directors. There's a lot of people that it takes to get a show on the air. I think that's the most surprising thing.
Down the long run, do you see yourself moving on beyond KELO-TV? And do you see yourself going back to being a reporter, or do you want to keep being a producer?
I think producing is where I'll stay. I don't know. I'm really happy at KELO right now. Life is so funny, you know, you think you know what you want, and then 5 years later it ends up differently, and it's great, but it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be. So for now, I'm extremely happy at KELO, and yeah, I could see myself moving to a bigger market someday to do producing, or even, you know, I think it would be interesting down the road to be like a news director or something like that. I'd really like to go into management, and so producing is a good step in that direction. I like kind of the behind the scenes stuff, and I think that's where I'll stay.
Just quickly, is there anything you'd like to tell people? Yeah, but, about your job, or just...
I don't know, we're always looking for story ideas, so if you know something that's going on, give us a call. If you see something in your neighborhood that's going on, that's how we get our best stories, is somebody says, did you know that this is happening across the street from me? We always appreciate phone calls from our viewers. It's one of our strengths, and we always appreciate it. So if anybody has story ideas, give us a call at KELO.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for being here today on Face to Face. I really enjoyed it. And I thank you for watching us here today. I'm Avi Forstein, and from all of us here at KELO-TV, good night.